Hey, welcome back to my channel where I'm building a RANS S21. First, let's talk a little bit about my progress. I guess I've kind of hit a building wall or block in the last couple months. I've not put in the hours that I had committed to myself. I've been getting a little frustrated with the lack of step-by-step directions. Every step requires a lot of research. I want to make sure things are done right. Usually requires researching a couple sources and bringing them together to make sure I do it right. That's led me to kind of back off my enthusiasm, and I've taken other priorities in life and advanced those. So I need to get my act in gear and get this build going again. I am not putting the commitment in that I thought. I've seen others sell their projects at about this phase because they don't get them done. I'm not going to be one of those people. So got to get my act together, got to get moving, got to get some more building time in, and that's my commitment. But in this episode, I continue with the engine, hoses and connections and wiring, and with that, let's just jump in and knock off another section. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my oil temperature sensor in, and if you look underneath the filter, you got a little plastic cap down there that comes out, and that looks like where your sensor goes. If I've got one piece of advice for anyone watching videos before mounting your engine, is figure out where all your sensors go and your AN fittings for sensors and tubes, and get those installed before you mount your engine. This is going to be a bear to get in there and get that sensor in and tighten it up, but that's what I've left myself, so we'll figure it out. It is so tight in here, and there's no way to get a wrench on here, open end or close end. What some have done is they've taken a 7/8 socket, this is a 7/8 size nut, and they've welded a nut on the end of the socket, put the socket in with the wire coming through, and then use that nut to turn. Well, I don't weld, so what I decided to do is I put a couple holes in a 7/8 socket, and I'm going to use a big steel nail to kind of use as my leverage to turn this with either pliers or vice grips or something. So I'll get that over the nut, turn it, and tighten it up appropriately. But if you are trying to install this after the engine mount, it's a bear. Well, here's another case for getting this thing put in before you mount your engine. Not only do you have to get this oil pressure or oil temperature gauge in, then you got to wire tie it. And there just is, I mean, you can see I'm trying to move my hands in here, and there's just no way to get in there. Finally, with needle nose, hemostats, my wire ties, I was able to do it. I should have shown the bloody hand. It was all from cutting on aluminum down there. So I'm sure someone with more skill than I could have done it better, but I couldn't figure out any other way to get in there. But I got it wire tied, I got it in, got it tight, and moving on. I am attaching the oil temperature wire, and before I crimped them and put heat shrink around them, I wanted to check and make sure I just touched them. It says there's no polarity, so whichever way I've got it now, I've got an oil temperature at 80, cylinder heads are at 80 and 80, so it seemed pretty consistent. Garage is about 80, so it looks like oil temperature is okay. So I'm going to hook it up that way. I've just ordered my hoses. They're all custom. I ordered them from TS Flight Lines. I guess they've got a good reputation for delivering good hoses. And these are my notes for kind of the fittings, just to remind myself. The AN 816s are straight, the 822s are 90 degrees, and the 823s are 45 degrees. Then they're followed with either a 4 or a 6. Typically the 4s are a 1/8 MPT thread, which goes into your motor, and they serve a 1/4 inch hose, and then they've got a hose fitting that referred to a number 4 hose. The 6 or the 6Ds are the 1/4 inch MPT threads. They go to 3/8 hoses. These are typically for your fuel lines. These are more for your sensor pressure lines. You can get fittings that are different fittings on one end than they are for the hose end, but those are more custom. Typically, when you see a number 4 hose, it's got the smaller and 1/8 threads And when you order number 6 hose, it gets larger, but you can order them in mixes. They're more custom. A note here, I've got AN fittings, the Army Navy fittings. They use a 37-degree angle on the hose ends. Automotive fittings, which look similar, use a different angle. So you cannot use non-AN fittings, nipples or fittings, like the automotive ones you get at an auto store, car parts, etc., with these hoses. I ordered 4 hoses for the manifold pressure, fuel pressure, the whole bunch of. They were about $600 for the hoses, and now it looks like the fuel pressure sensor, which goes into this last slot, is not included with the Titan engine. RANS says they don't include the fuel pressure with their builds. Most of the builders I've seen do include the fuel pressure. Garmin says it needs to be a GPT 75G, which up to 75 PSI. That's a $300 sensor. One of the builders said, oh, it was included with his EIS, and I'm like, I didn't see that with mine, so it looks like I'm going to have to order this. I've been trying to figure out the correct wiring of these sensor gauges. This is my oil pressure. You've got a black, red, and a green. And I searched and searched, and finally someone on the forum sent me, I got 2 pages. This one shows that the black is almost always the ground. We come over here and it shows oil pressure ground. And then the green, they're saying, is the pressure signal, and the red is the excitation input. And you come over here and they're showing oil pressure, 5 volts oil pressure. So I'm assuming the green is the signal out. You've got the ground and the voltage in, and then it regulates the pressure and it sends a signal back out. So it looks like the green. But then someone else sent me this chart, and it kind of helps explain a little bit better. Again, here's my oil pressure. Ground is black. This one they call red voltage rather than excitation. But I'm assuming I have never heard the expression excitation, but that's because I'm a first-time wire or panel guy. But both point over here to the 5 volt for the voltage in, ground, and then output would be your out, green. So that's the signal out. So on my cable my wire from the panel company, it's got low, high signal, I think. So low is ground, high is power, and then signal is this third wire. So that's the way I'm going to connect them, and then I'll do a test to make sure I'm showing 0 pressure with my engine not running. And that's where I'm going to move with it. I got some hoses that just arrived from Aircraft Specialty Flight Lines. They do these nice 4 and number 6 hoses. You tell them whether you want a straight or what angle fitting. They just put the standard size fitting on for the hose. I think it's the 1/4-inch hose gets the 1H NPT, and the 3/8-inch hose gets a 1/4 NPT. So I think that's the way it goes. And these are the number 6 hoses. So these are all set, and then I got some more fittings. And then this is an interesting valve that they sell. This goes off the fuel pump, and it's got it attaches a fuel pump, and then it's got a 1/4 hose off one and 1/8 off the other. So one actually feeds the fuel, and the other is the sensor. So the sensor needs a smaller hose. So this is an adapter that converts it, which Aircraft Specialty sells also. So that's pretty cool. Okay, before I wire up the red cube transducer, I'm gonna get my hose up here for the fuel line, which goes down to the fuel injector, and I'm gonna get this set for whatever direction it needs to be, and then secure it. This way, after I wire it, I don't have to get in there and do it while it's in there. I can do it while it's out. Okay, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna replace or exchange this fitting with the one that I got for the hoses. This is kind of a doubler. It's got the MPT threads here, and then it doubles to a 1/4 and a 3/8 hose for the fuel line, and then the other goes to the fuel sensor. I just got my fuel pressure sensor in from Stein. I think I mentioned there was some discussion around which one to get, the Clavico sensor or the Garmin. The Garmin manual mentions both. But I think I mentioned before there was a Garmin notice that went out that some of the clavicos were leaking and they were on recall and they had to be checked a lot. So Stein had actually changed the inventory on it, and they recommended just go with the Garmin. The Garmin was $300. The clavico other one was $150. I figure if they've got problems with them, this is the time to spend the money and get the Garmin. So this is a fuel pressure. RANS doesn't even put a fuel pressure in, and I don't currently fly looking at fuel pressure. I can see why it's a good thing to have. So I did decide to go with it, and we'll get it installed in that sensor bar. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get all my hoses that I ordered, and I'm going to hook them up and then set these fittings to the right angle so that they fit the hoses correctly. Then I'll get those set in. I'll get the sensors threaded in correctly permanently, and then install the sensor manifold onto the firewall. Everything right now is just kind of loosely attached. I've set the position and locked in with the pipe thread, and then these are extra ports that they send you closeouts for if you're not going to use them. So I've pipe threaded those, and this should be all set to install. I've got most of my fuel, or most of my lines hooked up. I had one error, but I made it work. Somehow when I ordered this hose down to the fuel servo, this is your gas comes from your fuel pump into your transducer for measuring fuel flow, and then from the transducer down to the fuel solenoid. My angling, my clocking on this hose was off. I don't know how, and I'm not going to sit and research it. So I had a 45-degree fitting that came straight out. I switched it to a 90-degree fitting with a little bit of an angle, and that fit my clocking on this hose. Although not perfect, I would have preferred a 45 coming straight down. This seems to work fine with just a little bit of angle difference, and there's plenty of hose length to get down there. So it's attached down here, and it's loose enough I'm not stretching it. Then on my manifold sensors, they're all in. These were all set. I'm missing one hose for the manifold pressure, but all the sensors are in. They're all fitted in with pipe thread, all angled the right direction and tightened up. So I think I'm all set with my hoses other than waiting for my manifold pressure hose. And then I've got to kind of fix this mess of wiring up here. Everything's attached, but nothing's really run. So I'll test it one more time and then start fixing all of this and putting it in place. Okay, my next project is another wire coming out from the panel, and it's labeled starter solenoid active high. And I pulled back some of the casing to see that it's a single wire. My starter solenoid is here, so that you know what first time builders go through is I've got two bolts, screws coming out from the end, and then I got an attachment here, and I think I've got one on the other side. So I'm not sure how to attach it, but more research time to figure out what this gets attached to. Obviously the starter solenoid, single wire, but where? So more research, and we'll let you know what I find. There is a figure in the figures manual 1105 showing the wiring for the starter solenoid, and it looks like that switch wire goes up to the number 2 screw, and then a 4 gauge goes over to the starter, and then the master, the cable coming in from the master, attaches to this side. So I think we got the answer to that wire installation. I was reading a little bit in the manual about the shunt and how that, the amp meter shunt, and how that connects, and also connecting this starter cable. And I read that you should not have the solenoid coax near or touching the sensor wires. And even though this wasn't going to be a permanent situation, I wasn't purposely keeping these separate, but apparently your sensor wires have to stay away from your coil wires, ignition wires. So this is going to get cut, and I probably put Adele clamps here anyways, but just if you're doing installation, there's a note that I just read and didn't know about. In hooking up the starter, I had the small wire coming out from the harness that said starter solenoid, so I hooked that one up to the second screw over here as indicated in the diagram. Then the 4 gauge, I've got the positive that hooks up on this side of the starter. That comes through down here, I ran it up underneath the engine. That connects here. Whoops, that connects here. And I've got the ground that again runs underneath. Connects over to the ground of the engine mount. I did put some Adele clamps in here with a little bracket. Let's see if I can get a shot of that. Bracket with an Adele clamp. Again, it's not tight, but it's keeping it away from the motor. And then I did a second one over here. You can see the the Adele clamp, or the little bracket here with the Adele clamp on the end. And again, just keeps these away from the motor. They're not real tight, but they're guides. And that should complete my starter solenoid hookup. Hey, that's probably a pretty good place to get this wrapped up. That section took 14.5 hours. That brings the project to date to 1227.9 hours. And in the next episode, we'll connect the alternator shunt, and then there's some breakers that have to go to the shunt and some other miscellaneous wires in that area. So we'll get that out as quickly as I can. So thanks a lot for watching, and remember, dream it, and just build it.